2:15 in the afternoon. The South China Sea. The USNS Richard E. Byrd sat heavily in the swells of the South China Sea. It was a massive dry cargo ship, carrying thousands of tons of fuel and ammunition. But today, its cargo was not the primary concern of the crew. The primary concern was the 3 high-speed intercept boats closing the distance from the northern horizon. This was not a routine encounter. The Byrd was an unarmed vessel operated by a civilian crew under the Military Sealift Command. In these waters, it was a sovereign piece of the United States, but it was a piece that lacked teeth. The sky was a pale and empty blue. The water below was a deep, deceptive turquoise that masked the jagged reefs of the Paracel Islands. Usually, the presence of a vessel like the Byrd was a sign of American reach and logistical power. Today, it felt like a target. The nearest American warship, the destroyer USS Higgins, was over 60 nautical miles away. At top speed, the Higgins was 14 minutes from being able to provide any meaningful support. In the world of naval boarding operations, 14 minutes was an eternity. Captain Miller stood on the bridge and gripped the railing. He watched the digital display. The 3 contacts were moving at 40 knots. They were not responding to radio queries. They were not showing standard identification signals. They were professional. They were precise. Most importantly, they were armed. The first officer looked at the captain. His voice was tight. "Captain, they are inside 2,000 meters. They are not slowing down." Captain Miller did not look away from the horizon. "Alert the Military Sealift Command. Signal the USS Higgins. Tell them we have unidentified fast attack craft closing at high speed. We are initiating non-kinetic defense measures." The first officer turned to the console. "The Higgins is acknowledging. They are coming about. But sir, they are too far. We are on our own for the next 14 minutes. The captain nodded slowly. "I am aware. Lock the bridge doors. Tell the crew to stay away from the railings. We follow the protocol for an unauthorized boarding. Do not escalate. We are civilians. Remember that." On the water, the lead Chinese intercept boat jumped over a swell. Spray flew high into the air, catching the bright afternoon sun. On the deck of the small craft, 6 men in dark maritime camouflage sat in 2 rows. They held Type 95 carbines across their chests. They wore heavy tactical vests and high-cut helmets with integrated communication headsets. They did not look like pirates. They looked like the elite of the People's Liberation Army Navy. Inside the lead boat, the team leader checked his watch. He spoke into his radio. "Target is maintaining course and speed. We are 2 minutes from the boarding point. Ensure all cameras are active. We are here to conduct a legal inspection of a vessel suspected of carrying restricted materials in our territorial waters. Do not fire unless fired upon. But do not let them stop the boarding." A voice crackled back in his ear. "Copy. The Americans are watching from the air. We have a Pate Poseidon circling 5 miles out. Stay focused on the deck." The intercept boats split. 2 moved toward the stern of the Byrd. The third accelerated toward the midship boarding station. The massive hull of the American supply ship loomed over them like a steel cliff. The wake of the Byrd was a churning path of white foam that threatened to swamp the smaller boats, but the Chinese pilots were skilled. They matched the speed of the giant vessel. They moved into the dead zone where the ship's cameras had difficulty tracking. On the bridge of the Byrd, the alarm began to wail. It was a rhythmic, piercing sound that signaled the breach of the perimeter. The crew watched the monitors in silence. They saw the first grapnel hook fly through the air. It caught the railing of the main deck with a metallic clang that could be heard even through the thick glass of the bridge. The afternoon was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 2:18 in the afternoon. The salt spray was a fine mist against the visor of Lieutenant Zhang's tactical helmet. Inside the lead intercept boat, the roar of the triple outboard engines was a physical weight. Zhang watched the steel wall of the American supply ship slide past just feet away. He was the commander of a specialized maritime unit from the People's Liberation Army Navy. His orders were explicit. They were to board the vessel, secure the bridge, and locate a specific shipment of deep-sea acoustic sensors that Beijing claimed were being illegally deployed in protected waters. It was a mission designed to test the limits of American resolve without firing a single shot. The boat surged. The pilot executed a sharp turn, pinning the small craft against the hull of the Richard E. Byrd. Zhang felt the impact through the soles of his boots. He did not wait for the boat to settle. He reached for the pneumatic ladder and engaged the magnetic clamps. Going up, Zhang said into his comms, "Team 1, following me. Team 2, secure the stern. Remember, this is a lawful inspection. Do not chamber around unless I give the command." He climbed with practiced efficiency. The metal of the American ship was hot from the afternoon sun. Within seconds, Zhang cleared the railing and rolled onto the deck. He was followed immediately by 3 of his men. They moved in a synchronized diamond formation, their weapons held at the low-ready position. The deck was vast and cluttered with shipping containers and heavy winches. It was a maze of steel that offered 1,000 hiding places. Zhang scanned the upper decks. He saw faces in the windows of the bridge. They were not soldiers. They were merchant mariners, in blue coveralls. Some were holding cameras, some were holding radios. None of them were armed. This was the calculated gamble of operation. By boarding a civilian crewed vessel, the Chinese team had created a tactical paradox. If the Americans used force to repel them, it would be seen as an escalation against a police action. If they did nothing, the sovereignty of the ship was forfeit. Across the deck, a door hissed open. A man in a high-visibility vest stepped out. He was a large man, an American boatswain, and he was holding a heavy fire hose. He did not look intimidated. He looked angry. "You are trespassing on a United States sovereign vessel," the boatswain shouted. His voice carried over the wind. "Disengage and return to your boats immediately." Zhang did not raise his weapon. He stepped forward, his boots ringing on the deck plating. "We are conducting a maritime safety inspection under the authority of the Regional Coastal Command. We intend no harm to your crew. Stand down and allow us passage to the bridge." The boatswain did not move. He tightened his grip on the brass nozzle of the hose. "I do not care what you call it. You are not coming on this ship. On this ship." Behind Zhang, the second team had already reached the stern. They were moving toward the engine room. On the bridge, the American captain was watching the 14-minute countdown on his primary display. 12 minutes remained. High above, the Pate Poseidon surveillance plane banked hard. The pilot looked down at the tiny figures on the deck of the Byrd. He keyed his long-range radio to the USS Higgins. "Higgins, this is Guardian 1-1. We have boots on deck. I repeat, the Chinese have boarded the Byrd. There is a confrontation occurring midship. The crew is attempting to resist with non-lethal means. What is your estimated time of arrival?" The response from the destroyer was immediate. "Guardian 1-1, we are at flank speed. We are 11 minutes out. We are observing multiple radar blooms from the mainland. They are sending air cover. Do not, I repeat, do not engage the fighters. Maintain eyes on the deck." On the ship, the boatswain opened the valve. A high-pressure stream of seawater hit the deck inches from Zhang's feet. It was a warning. Zhang's team shifted their weight, their fingers twitching near their triggers. The professional calm of the encounter was beginning to fracture. The water was cold. The tension was white-hot. 2:21 in the afternoon. The Combat Information Center of the USS Higgins was a dim cavern of blue light and electronic humming. The destroyer was already vibrating under the immense strain of its gas turbine engines as it pushed toward 35 knots. This was no longer a routine transit of the South China Sea. On the main tactical display, a cluster of red icons swarmed a single blue dot representing the USNS Richard E. Byrd. The question for the commander was whether the Higgins could cover 60 nautical miles before the standoff on the deck of the supply ship turned into a shooting war. Commander Sarah Vance stood behind the tactical consoles, her eyes fixed on the live feed from the Pate Poseidon overhead. The grain of the video showed the tiny figures of the Chinese Commandos and the American boatswain. It looked like a silent film from another era, but the stakes were modern and lethal. The Higgins was still 11 minutes from its intercept point. In naval terms, they were rushing to the scene, But to the crew of the Byrd, the destroyer was still over the horizon. The tactical action officer spoke. "Ma'am, we have 2 J-11 fighters launching from Woody Island. They are at 20,000 feet and accelerating. They will be over the Byrd in 4 minutes." Commander Vance did not blink. "Maintain our current course and speed. Do not illuminate the fighters with fire control radar. We do not want to give them a reason to arm their missiles. Keep our Aegis system in search mode only. Our mission is the Byrd." The officer nodded. "Copy. Search mode only. The J-11s are squawking identification. They are claiming this is a restricted military zone." The USS Higgins was a Flight II AR Lee Burke-class destroyer. It was one of the most powerful surface combatants in the world, equipped with 96 vertical launching cells and a sophisticated phased array radar. It was built to fight entire carrier groups. However, all that power was difficult to apply to a boarding party on a civilian crewed ship. If Vance fired a warning shot from her 5-inch gun, the concussion alone could damage the Byrd. If she sent her Seahawk helicopter, it would be an easy target for the J-11 fighters. Commander Vance keyed her internal comms. "Bridge. This is the captain. I want a bridge-to-bridge channel open to the lead Chinese intercept boat. Use the international maritime frequency. I want to talk to whoever is in charge on that deck." The bridge responded. "Captain, we are attempting to hail. They are ignoring all transmissions. They are maintaining radio silence." Vance looked back at the screen. She saw the boatswain on the Byrd retreat as 2 more Chinese commandos vaulted over the railing. The American crew was being pushed back by the sheer weight of the boarding party. There were now 12 armed men on the deck of the unarmed ship. The 14-minute window was shrinking, and the Higgins was still a silhouette on the horizon. The commander turned to her communications officer. "Signal the 7th Fleet. Inform them that the Higgins is prepared to execute a close-quarters intercept. Tell them we are entering the gray zone. We will arrive in 10 minutes." The ship leaned into a slight turn, its bow cutting through the turquoise water and throwing a massive white wake. The engines roared, a mechanical scream that echoed the tension of the crew. On the monitors, the Chinese commandos reached the heavy steel doors leading to the interior of the Byrd. They were no longer just on the deck. They were moving inside. The distance was closing, but the control of the ship was slipping away. 2:24 in the afternoon. The central corridor of the Richard E. Byrd smelled of hydraulic fluid and salt. The heavy steel door to the bridge was a barrier of 2-inch reinforced metal. Behind it, Captain Miller and his small bridge team watched the closed-circuit television monitors. The Chinese commandos had moved with terrifying speed. They had bypassed the main cargo deck and were now in the primary superstructure of the ship. On the screen, 3 men in dark green tactical gear stood outside the bridge door. One of them held a compact thermal cutting tool. Another held a heavy ballistic shield. The sound of the cutting tool began. It was a high-pitched, metallic scream that vibrated through the floorboards. Captain Miller keyed the internal ship communication system. "This is the captain. All crew members stay in your designated safe zones. Do not attempt to engage the boarding party. I repeat, do not engage. We are maintaining a record of all activities for the Department of State." He looked at his first officer. "Open the door." The first officer hesitated. "Sir?" Miller's voice was steady. "If they cut through, they will damage the seal and the electronics. If we open it, we maintain the dignity of the bridge. Open the door." The first officer hit the electronic release. The heavy door hissed open. Lieutenant Zhang stepped onto the bridge. He did not lead with his weapon. His Type 95 carbine was slung across his chest, his hands visible and empty. His 2 teammates stayed in the doorway, their eyes scanning the corners of the room. Zhang pulled a laminated document from his tactical vest and held it up. Zhang spoke in clear, accented English. "Captain, I am Lieutenant Zhang of the People's Liberation Army Navy. Under the authority of the Regional Maritime Safety Administration, we are here to inspect your manifest and cargo. We have reason to believe you are transporting unauthorized military surveillance equipment into a restricted zone. Captain Miller did not move from his chair. Lieutenant, you are standing on a United States naval ship. You have no authority here. This is a violation of international law. You are a trespasser. Any action you take will be reported as an act of aggression against a sovereign vessel. Zhang did not flinch. We are not here for a debate on law. We are here for the censors. Provide the manifest for Cargo Hold 3. Now, outside, the sound of the world seemed to tear apart. 2 Chinese J-11 fighters screamed over the ship at 500 feet. The roar of the jet engines was so loud, the windows of the bridge rattled in their frames. The shadow of the aircraft flickered across the deck like a passing blade. The Chinese pilots were making their presence known. They were the shield for the men on the deck. The captain looked at the radar display. The USS Higgins was now only 8 minutes away. He could see the icon for the American destroyer moving with purpose. It was a lone blue square in a sea of red, but it was getting larger with every update. The captain turned back to Zhang. I will not provide the manifest. You can stay on this bridge, or you can leave. But if you touch our cargo, you are crossing a line that neither of us can uncross. Zhang checked his tactical watch. He knew the Higgins was coming. He knew the window for a quiet inspection was closing. He gestured to his men. Zhang spoke into his radio. Team 2, proceed to Cargo Hold 3. Use the master keys if necessary. Secure the perimeter. Team 3, monitor the American destroyer. Tell the J-11 flight lead to maintain a low-altitude patrol. We need more time. The Commandos moved with clinical efficiency. They ignored the glares of the American merchant mariners. They were focused on the mission. In the tight confines of the ship, the air felt heavy. Every movement was a potential spark. Every word was a gamble. Captain Miller watched the monitors. He saw the second team of commandos reach the heavy hatch of the third cargo hold. They were placing a sensor on the lock. Lieutenant, Miller said softly, you are making a mistake. You are looking for something that is not there, and you are doing it in front of the whole world. Zhang looked at the captain. For a moment, the professional mask slipped. There was a flash of uncertainty in his eyes, but he did not back down. We will see, Zhang replied. The countdown continued. 7 minutes until the Higgins arrived. The sky was full of thunder. The ship was full of ghosts. 2:30 in the afternoon. The South China Sea was no longer a place of silence. The USS Higgins was now 1,000 yards from the hull of the Richard E. Byrd. The American destroyer was a wall of gray steel, its bow cutting a massive white scar across the turquoise water. The vibrations from its 4 gas turbine engines could be felt in the deck plates of the supply ship. The 14-minute window was gone. The distance between a local incident and a global crisis was now measured in meters. Commander Vance stood on the bridge of the Higgins. Her hands were behind her back, gripped tight. Maintain speed. We are going to cross their bow. Force the intercept boats to peel away or be crushed. The tactical action officer responded. Ma'am. The J-11 fighters are diving. They are at 200 feet. They are supersonic. 2:30 and 30 seconds in the afternoon. The sonic boom hit the Higgins like a physical blow. The windows rattled. The air itself seemed to crack. The 2 Chinese fighters pulled up. In a vertical climb, their afterburners twin suns in the afternoon sky. They were drawing the Americans into a fight. Commander Vance did not flinch. Bridge. Target the lead intercept boat with the 5-inch gun. Do not fire. I want them to see the barrel move. I want them to know we are ready. The forward turret of the Higgins rotated with a smooth, hydraulic whine. The long barrel lowered until it was pointing directly at the small Chinese craft bobbing in the wake of the Byrd. It was a clear and lethal signal. On the intercept boat, the Chinese sailors scrambled. They were looking at a weapon that could vaporize their vessel in a single second. 2:31 in the afternoon. Inside Cargo Hold 3, Lieutenant Zhang heard the roar of the jets. He felt the ship shudder. As the Higgins pulled alongside, he stood over the American deep-sea drone, his thermal cutter in his hand. If he destroyed the drone now, the evidence of his mission would be gone. but the act of destruction would be the spark. Zhang spoke into his radio. Base. The American destroyer is alongside. They have a weapons lock on our boats. If I proceed with the destruction of the property, they will fire. They will fire. Await instructions. The response from the mainland was a burst of static. The Higgins was now using its electronic warfare suite. The radio jammer was active. Zhang was isolated. He looked at the green lights of the drone. He looked at the camera lens of the machine. It was recording his face. It was recording the insignia on his shoulder. "Sir," one of his commandos whispered, "the Americans are on the other side of that door. I can hear their boots." 2:31 and 30 seconds in the afternoon. On the bridge of the Byrd, Captain Miller looked out the window. The Higgins was so close, he could see the faces of the American sailors on the rail. He could see the Phalanx close-in weapons system tracking the Chinese fighters as they circled back for another pass. The entire scene was a powder keg. One nervous finger, one mechanical failure, or one misunderstood command would start a war. Lieutenant Zhang stepped toward the drone. He raised the cutting tool. He looked at the American captain through the closed-circuit camera. He knew that his next move would define the next decade of history. The Higgins let out another blast of its siren. It was a scream of warning that drowned out the wind. 2:31 and 45 seconds in the afternoon. The air on the bridge of the Richard E. Byrd was thick with the smell of ozone and sweat. Captain Miller picked up the handset for the internal ship communication system. He did not look at the Chinese commandos guarding the door. He looked directly into the camera lens of the security system. Captain Miller spoke. "Lieutenant Zhang, before you use that thermal cutter, I suggest you look at your tactical data link. My ship is not just a supply vessel. It is currently a relay station for the International Maritime Organization. That drone you are standing over is not a secret weapon. It is a deep-sea environmental monitor. And right now, every second of your boarding is being broadcast live to the United Nations Maritime Council in Geneva." 2:32 in the afternoon. Inside Cargo Hold 3, Lieutenant Zhang froze. He looked at the small tablet mounted to his wrist. A notification was flashing in bright yellow. His command center on Hainan Island was sending an emergency data burst. He opened the file. It was a video feed. It was a live, high-definition stream of himself, standing over the green drone, holding a cutting tool. The watermark on the video belonged to a global maritime transparency initiative. Zhang's team leader for the second group spoke into the radio. "Sir, the American destroyer is broadcasting a wideband signal. They are not jamming us anymore. They are acting as a signal booster. They are sending this feed to every satellite in range." Zhang felt the weight of the situation shift. This was the pivot. The mission was no longer a secret inspection in the gray zone. It was a public event. In the world of modern geopolitical maneuvering, the only thing more dangerous than a missile was a camera. Beijing had authorized a quiet seizure of technology. They had not authorized a televised international incident. 2:33 in the afternoon. On the bridge of the USS Higgins, Commander Vance watched the data stream. The bridge-to-bridge radio crackled to life. It was not the intercept boats. It was a heavy, authoritative voice speaking from the Chinese Southern Theater Command. The Chinese admiral spoke. "USS Higgins. This is the Southern Theater Command. We have completed our preliminary maritime safety check of the vessel Richard E. Byrd. We have identified the cargo as non-threatening. Our boarding party is preparing to depart. We advise you to maintain a distance of 2 nautical miles to ensure a safe withdrawal." Commander Vance looked at her tactical action officer. A small, professional smile touched her lips. He is giving himself an exit. He is calling it a completed inspection. Vance spoke into the radio. "Southern Theater Command, this is the Higgins. We acknowledge your statement. We will maintain a distance of 2,000 yards to facilitate your departure. We expect all your personnel to be off the Byrd within 5 minutes. We are monitoring the deck." Inside the cargo hold, Lieutenant Zhang stepped back from the drone. He signaled his men to lower their weapons. The tension did not vanish, but the immediate threat of violence began to recede. The professional calculated risk had failed. The Americans had used transparency as a shield. Zhang spoke into his radio. "All teams, this is Zhang. The inspection is concluded. We are withdrawing to the intercept boats. Move with discipline. Do not look at the cameras." He looked up at the ceiling one last time. He knew that somewhere, thousands of miles away, analysts were already dissecting his movements. He had not started a war, but he had lost the tactical moment. 2:34 in the afternoon. The Chinese commandos began to move back toward the main deck. On the horizon, the J-11 fighters turned north, their afterburners fading into small points of light. The 14-minute crisis was entering a new phase. The guns were still loaded, but the fingers were moving away from the triggers. The morning was over. The afternoon was descending into a cold, professional standoff. 2:35 in the afternoon. The internal corridors of the Richard E. Byrd were silent, except for the heavy, rhythmic thud of tactical boots. Lieutenant Zhang led his team out of the cargo hold and back toward the main deck. They passed the American merchant mariners, who stood pressed against the bulkheads. There was no shouting. There was only the cold, hard stare of two groups of professionals, who had nearly killed each other 10 minutes prior. The air was thick with the smell of hydraulic fluid and the lingering tension of the standoff. Every man on that ship knew how close they had come to the edge. 2:37 in the afternoon. The wind had picked up, whipping the white foam of the Higgins wake into a fine spray that coated the deck of the supply ship. On the bridge of the destroyer, the tactical action officer monitored the departure through a high-resolution optical sensor. "Ma'am, Team 1 is on the main deck," the officer reported. "Team 2 is at the stern. They are preparing to egress. The intercept boats are moving into position to receive them." Commander Vance stood at the edge of the bridge wing, her binoculars fixed on the figures in dark green. "Keep the 5-inch gun trained on the lead boat. Do not deviate. If they try to take a hostage or damage the exterior hull on the way out, we need to be ready to react instantly." "What is the status of the J-11 fighters?" "The fighters have climbed to 30,000 feet," the officer replied. "They are loitering. They are watching us, but they are no longer diving." It looks like the order to disengage has reached everyone. 2:39 in the afternoon. The lead intercept boat slammed against the hull of the Richard E. Byrd. The pilots struggled to keep the small craft steady in the churning water created by the close proximity of the Higgins. One by one, the Chinese commandos timed the swell of the ocean. They jumped from the deck of the American ship back into their moving vessel, with practiced, athletic precision. Lieutenant Zhang was the last man on the railing. He paused for a moment and looked back. At the bridge of the American ship, he saw the camera lenses still pointed at his face. He saw Captain Miller watching him from behind the reinforced glass. Zhang did not offer a salute. He did not offer a gesture of defiance. He simply turned and jumped. He landed hard in the intercept boat and signaled the pilot to disengage. The 3 Chinese boats throttled up, their engines screaming as they turned north. They left a trail of white water behind them, moving away from the Byrd at 40 knots. Inside the Combat Information Center of the Higgins, the atmosphere remained clinical. There were no cheers. There was no celebration. The crew was already reassessing the tactical data. They had prevented a seizure, but they had also revealed their own response times and electronic warfare capabilities. Commander Vance keyed the ship-wide intercom. "All stations, this is the captain. The boarding party has departed the Byrd. We are maintaining general quarters. We will escort the Byrd until it is clear of the contested zone. Remain vigilant." The situation is stable, but the mission is not over. On the Byrd, the boatswain finally turned off the fire hose. He watched the Chinese boats disappear into the haze on the horizon. He looked at his hands and realized they were shaking. The 14-minute window had closed. The immediate threat was gone. But as the Higgins took up its station 500 yards off, the Byrd's port quarter, the crew realized that the rules of the South China Sea had been rewritten in the last quarter hour. The gray zone was no longer a theory. It was a reality they would have to live with every day. 2:40 in the afternoon. The wake of the 3 Chinese intercept boats was a fading white scar on the blue water. Inside the lead boat, Lieutenant Zhang did not speak. The wind whipped at his collar, but the heat of the adrenaline was finally beginning to cool. He looked back at the massive, blocky silhouette of the Richard E. Byrd. It looked like a floating warehouse, slow and vulnerable, but it had won the day. Zhang checked his wrist tablet one more time. The video of the boarding was already being mirrored across a dozen international news servers. His face was now a matter of public record. He keyed his radio to his base on Hainan Island. Base, we are clear of the target. We are returning to the primary coordinates. The American destroyer is maintaining a parallel course at 2,000 yards. They are not illuminating us with fire control radar. I repeat, the lock has been broken. The response was short and devoid of emotion. Copy. Proceed to the rendezvous. High Command is reviewing the data. Maintain radio silence until you reach the territorial limit. 2:42 in the afternoon. On the bridge of the USS Higgins, the high-pitched electronic whine of the combat systems alert finally ceased. The tactical action officer exhaled a long breath. Ma'am, radar is back to standby. We have dropped the lock on the J-11 fighters. They are crossing the 12-mile limit. They are no longer a factor. Commander Vance did not relax her posture. She watched the green icons on the primary display. The red symbols representing the Chinese assets were moving away with mechanical consistency. The crisis was transitioning from a tactical problem to a diplomatic one. Maintain our escort position, Vance ordered. Keep the crew at modified general quarters. I want the damage control teams to stay on the move. We need a full report from the Byrd on the state of their cargo and their crew. 2:45 in the afternoon. Inside cargo hold 3 of the Richard E. Byrd. Captain Miller stood next to the green deep-sea drone. The hold was quiet now, the only sound being the hum of the ship's ventilation system. The black tarp lay on the floor like a discarded skin. The drone sat on its cradle, its green status lights blinking with rhythmic indifference. It had no idea it had almost been the catalyst for a naval battle. The first officer walked up beside the captain. He was holding a handheld radio. Sir, the Higgins is asking for a status report. They want to know if the boarding party left any equipment behind or if there was any structural damage. Miller looked at the heavy steel door. The edges were scarred where the thermal cutter had begun its work. Tell them the damage is cosmetic. The crew is shaken but unhurt. We are maintaining our course. And tell Commander Vance. Tell her we appreciate the 14-minute arrival time. The first officer nodded and began to speak into the radio. Miller reached out and touched the cool metal of the drone. He knew this was not a victory. It was a stay of execution. The Chinese had tested a specific vulnerability. They had found that the Americans would use transparency as a weapon, but they had also learned exactly how long it took for a destroyer to reach a lonely supply ship. 2:48 in the afternoon. The Pate Poseidon circled one last time. The pilot looked down at the two ships. From 5,000 feet, they looked like toys on a vast blue table. The Chinese boats were gone, lost in the haze to the north. The ocean looked peaceful again, the turquoise water hiding the sensors and the submarines that populated the depths. Guardian 1 to Higgins, the pilot said. The sky is clear. We are bingo on fuel. Returning to base. Good luck down there. Copy. Guardian, Vance replied from the destroyer. We have the watch. The crisis had lasted exactly 33 minutes from the first sighting of the intercept boats. In that time, 2 nuclear powers had moved their fingers to the triggers, and then, slowly, painfully, pulled them back. The immediate danger was over. The long-term consequences were just beginning to breathe. 2:45 in the afternoon. The air on the main deck of the Richard E. Byrd was suddenly, hauntingly quiet. The last Chinese intercept boat had pulled away, its triple engines leaving a boiling white scar on the turquoise water. The gap between the two vessels widened from 10 meters to 50, then 100. The physical threat was retreating, but the atmosphere on the American ship remained heavy. The civilian crew did not cheer. They did not wave. They stood in small groups, their hands resting on railings or clutching radios, watching the dark green hulls grow smaller against the horizon. The boatswain, who had held the fire hose, sat down on a steel bit. His high-visibility vest was soaked with spray. He looked at his hands and saw they were shaking with a violent, rhythmic intensity. He had stood down 12 armed men with nothing but a nozzle and a stubborn refusal to move. Now that the danger was gone, his body was finally processing the reality of the last 14 minutes. Captain Miller stepped out onto the bridge wing. He looked down at his crew. "Boatswain, are you all right?" The boatswain looked up and took a long, jagged breath. "Yes, Captain, just waiting for my heart to slow down. I think I broke the nozzle handle." Miller nodded once. "Check the deck for any equipment they might have left behind. I want a full inventory of the cargo hold seals. Do not touch anything with your bare hands. Treat the entire area as a crime scene." Below the bridge, the silence was absolute. It was the kind of silence that follows a narrow escape from a catastrophe. On a warship like the Higgins, the crew was trained for this specific brand of terror. On a merchant vessel like the Byrd, the crew consisted of engineers, cooks, and navigators. They were professionals, but they were not combatants. The realization that they had been the center of a potential world war was beginning to sink in. 2:52 in the afternoon. The USS Higgins maintained its station 500 yards off the port beam. From the deck of the Byrd, the destroyer looked like a silent guardian. Its radar panels continued to rotate, scanning the empty sky. Its guns were still manned, but the barrels had been returned to their neutral stowage positions. The two ships moved in a tight formation, a pair of steel islands in a contested sea. Inside the engine room of the Byrd, the chief engineer wiped grease from his forehead. He looked at the pressure gauges. The ship was pushing through the water at its maximum sustained speed. He spoke into his headset. "Bridge, engineering. We are holding at 20 knots. No issues with the plant." "But Captain, we are burning fuel at a high rate. We will need to top off once we reach the secondary rendezvous," Captain Miller responded. "Copy, Chief. Maintain best speed. We are not slowing down until we are 40 miles clear of the shoal." Miller turned back to the primary display. The three red icons representing the Chinese boats were now over 10 nautical miles away. They were returning to their base. The J-11 fighters had disappeared from the radar entirely, likely refueling at an island airbase. The immediate tactical puzzle was solved, but the strategic damage was done. The captain looked at his first officer. "The cameras.
I need eyes on that anomaly.
Are they still recording?" The first officer checked the console. "Yes, sir. The stream is still live. We have over 2 million viewers on the International Maritime Portal. Most of them are news agencies." Miller sighed and looked out at the water. "Good. Let them watch the empty deck. Let them see that we are still here. But tell the crew to keep their heads down. The show is over for today." The afternoon sun was beginning its long descent toward the western horizon. The water turned from turquoise to a deep, bruised purple. The Richard E. Byrd continued its journey, escorted by the gray ghost of the Higgins. They were safe for now, but the crew knew the silence was temporary. The South China Sea had a long memory, and the 14 minutes they had just survived would be studied in war colleges for decades. 10:30 at night. 7th Fleet Headquarters, Yokosuka, Japan. The Situation Room was quiet, lit only by the cool glow of high-resolution monitors. Admiral Harrison stood at the head of a long glass table, his arms crossed. On the main screen, the face of Lieutenant Zhang was frozen in a high-definition still. The image was remarkably clear. You could see the individual fibers of his tactical vest and the faint reflection of the American cargo hold in his visor. It was the face of a man who had realized he was being watched by the entire world. A senior intelligence officer tapped a tablet, and a map of the South China Sea appeared. The Richard E. Byrd is now 200 miles clear of the Paracel Islands. The USS Higgins remains in close escort. We have a second destroyer, the USS Howard, joining the formation within the hour. The immediate tactical threat has dissipated. The admiral did not look away from Zhang's face. The tactical threat is gone. The strategic problem is just beginning. What are we seeing from the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs? The usual, the officer replied. They are claiming a routine maritime safety inspection in their territorial waters. They are accusing us of provocative behavior by maneuvering a destroyer in close proximity to their boarding craft. But the narrative is not sticking. The live stream from the Byrd has already been viewed over 40 million times. The footage of armed commandos entering a civilian bridge is difficult to explain away as a safety check. The admiral walked to the window and looked out at the dark harbor. They were testing us. They wanted to see if we would fire. They wanted to see if the crew of a military sea-lift command ship would fold under pressure. And most importantly, they wanted to know exactly how long it takes for a Byrd-class destroyer to go from 60 miles out to alongside. Now they have the data. 14 minutes. 14 minutes is fast, Admiral, the officer said. It is fast today, Harrison replied. But next time, they might start the clock when our nearest ship is 20 minutes away, or 30. They are learning our rhythms. This was a rehearsal. 3 days later. The Pentagon, Washington, D.C. A classified report was circulating through the halls of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It was titled The Gray Zone Incident. Tactical Transparency as a Counter-Boarding Measure. The document analyzed every second of the 33-minute encounter. Military analysts were already calling it a turning point in modern naval history. The conclusion of the report was blunt. The age of the quiet, deniable boarding was over. The use of high-bandwidth satellite links and automated deep-sea sensors had transformed an unarmed supply ship into a powerful information warfare platform. By refusing to fire a weapon and instead turning on a camera, Captain Miller had achieved a tactical victory that a full broadside from the Higgins could not have matched. However, the report also contained a warning. The success of the Byrd was dependent on the presence of the Higgins. Without the threat of the destroyer's 5-inch gun and the umbrella of its Aegis radar, the Chinese team would have likely disabled the cameras and taken the drone by force. The 14-minute gap remained the most dangerous variable in the Pacific. In the hallways of the Pentagon, experts debated the new rules. If every supply ship was now a live-streaming node, the threshold for escalation had shifted. The gray zone was becoming brighter, illuminated by the glare of public scrutiny. But a brighter zone was not necessarily a safer one. It simply meant that the next time a line was crossed, the world would see it happen in real time. The Richard E. Byrd reached its destination in Subic Bay under a clear morning sky. The crew was tired and the ship was scarred, but the flag was still flying. The 14 minutes that almost started a war were over. The long, silent struggle for the sea, however, was only getting started. 8:45 in the morning. 3 days after the boarding of the Richard E. Byrd, the South China Sea remained as blue and indifferent as it had been on the afternoon of the crisis. From 30,000 feet, the turquoise reefs and the white foam of the waves looked like a painting. There were no scars on the water to show where a destroyer and a supply ship had stood off against elite commandos and supersonic fighters. The ocean had a way of swallowing history as quickly as it swallowed a wake. In the high-ceilinged lecture halls of the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, the data was already being integrated into new tactical simulations. The incident was no longer a news story. It was a case study. Analysts and officers sat in the dim light of projectors, watching the grainy footage from the Byrd over and over again. They were not looking at the weapons. They were looking at the timing. They called it the 14-minute gap. One instructor pointed a laser at the screen, highlighting the moment the USS Higgins appeared on the horizon. This is the new reality of maritime sovereignty, the instructor said to the room of silent officers. The Chinese did not leave because they were outgunned. They left because they were outwatched. The tactical win belonged to the Higgins, but the strategic win belonged to the civilian crew of the Byrd. They held the line without a single round of ammunition. They understood that in the gray zone, the most powerful weapon is the truth, delivered in real time. 1,000 miles to the west, on Hainan Island, a different kind of debrief was taking place. Lieutenant Zhang sat in a small, windowless room. He was still wearing his dark maritime camouflage, but his tactical gear had been removed. Across from him sat 3 senior officials from the People's Liberation Army Navy. They were not shouting. Their voices were low and measured, which was far more dangerous. "You allowed yourself to be filmed," the senior official said. It was a statement, not a question. Zhang kept his back straight. The Americans had integrated the camera systems into the ship's emergency beacon, sir. To disable the cameras, we would have had to destroy the bridge consoles. My orders were to avoid a kinetic escalation unless fired upon. The official looked at the photo of the deep-sea drone on the table. They used our own rules against us. They created a situation where the cost of the sensor was lower than the cost of the international fallout. You made the correct decision to withdraw. But do not mistake restraint for peace. The Americans have shown us their shield. Now, we must find a way to reach past it. Back at sea, the USS Higgins was already on its next mission. It was escorting a different supply ship, a different set of targets in a different part of the contested waters. Commander Vance stood on the bridge wing and watched the sun catch the spray of the bow wave. She thought about Captain Miller and the boatswain with the fire hose. She thought about the 14 minutes where she had pushed her engines to the breaking point, wondering if she would arrive in time to save them or only in time to avenge them. Modern warfare was no longer defined by the roar of the 5-inch gun or the launch of a Tomahawk missile. It was defined by the agonizing silence of a radio channel. It was defined by the steady hand of a sailor who chose not to pull the trigger when every instinct screamed for him to do so. It was a game of nerves played out over thousands of square miles of empty water. The Richard E. Byrd sat at a pier in Subic Bay, its hull being scrubbed of the salt and the grime of the journey. The crew was on shore leave, finally able to sleep without the sound of jet engines in their dreams. The ship looked ordinary again. It looked like just another piece of the global supply chain, hauling fuel and food across the world. But as the sun set over the Pacific, the lights of the Higgins twinkled on the horizon. The destroyer was still out there, prowling the dark water, maintaining the watch. The incident was over. But the tension was a permanent part of the landscape. Both nations had learned a valuable lesson in the 14-minute window. They had learned that the most advanced weapons can be stopped by the simple act of being seen. No missiles flew, no ships were lost, but history had shifted. When the line was finally crossed, both sides chose restraint. The future of the Pacific would be decided not by who fired first, but by who possessed the courage to be the last one to stay silent. The sea remained vast. The stakes remained absolute, and somewhere over the horizon, the clock was already starting again.